So what we did, we got up to Mishnah Vav last time, and we read it. Today we're going to go through it a little more carefully with the Bartanura. But before we do, we're going to review something that we have already learned back in Masechet Tamid, and we'll see it's a little bit different uh, between Masechet Tamid and Masechet Yoma. And we already discussed this. The Gemara itself discusses the fact that the Tana who learned Masechet Tamid is not the same Tana that learned Masechet Yoma. And this is also another example of that. We'll see, because it doesn't agree exactly, the two Mishnayot. What we're up to in Masechet Yoma, we're talking about the Ma'aracha. And the Ma'aracha is they are, right? They're Ma'arachot. Those are the fires that are actually on the Mizbeach. So maybe I'll start with this. So we have this particular illustration. This is the overhead view of the Mizbeach HaNechoshet. That's the outside Mizbeach. And you go up the ramp. And then over here in the southeast corner, this is the Ma'aracha Gedola. Right? So that's the fire, that's the main fire that is going to be used for burning the pieces from the Korban Tamid. Over here, a little on the western side, it's supposed to be 4 amot up from the corner here. This is the second Ma'aracha, and this is the Ma'aracha. This is the fire where they take the coals to use inside on the Mizbeach HaPnimi for burning the Ketoret. In the middle, the round thing, is the Tapuach, which is the gathered up ash. And then we'll see what we're going to go over now. We learned in Masechet Tamid that there's actually another Ma'aracha over here on the north side. It's not in this illustration. What we're going to see in Yoma is that there were different opinions about how many Ma'arachot. But what we'll see is, everybody agrees that there are these two Ma'arachot are there every day. So let's review a little bit. So this is the second chapter of Masechet Tamid. And just to give us a quick reminder, after Trumat Hadeshen, then we came here to the beginning of the second chapter. Ra'uhu echav shi'arad. So when the other Kohanim see that the Kohen who took the ash to be Mekayem Trumat Hadeshen, he goes down from the Mizbeach, Vehem Ratzu Uval, and then they run and come. Mi'aru v'kichu yedehem regleihem min kiyor, so of course they have to go and wash their hands and legs from the kiyor. Natlu et ha'magrefot v'et ha'tzinorot v'alu l'rosh hamizbeach. They take these different implements, they go up to the top of the Mizbeach, and what they do is they kind of organize things, right? Because things have been burning throughout the night on the Mizbeach. Ha'evarina apdarim shelo nitaklu mi ba'erev sonkino tam litzdadei hamizbeach. So the limbs and the fats that were not consumed from the night before, they're pushed over to the side of the Mizbeach. If there isn't enough room on the Mizbeach, on the sides of the Mizbeach, so then they put them out on the Sovev. Sodrim Tam B'Sovev Al HaKevesh. As the Bartram explains, meaning Al HaKevesh Shekeneged HaSovev. Just to remind you, the Sovev, actually we should get a side view. Do you remember does anybody remember what the Sovev is, or maybe you know?
It's a small path above the Mizbeach.
So I just realized now somewhere there. If you look at the Mizbeach from the side, I don't have a good side view here. If you look at the Mizbeach, about 5 amot up from the ground is the Sovev, and the Sovev is it's a blita, right? It's something that sticks out on the side of the Mizbeach. It's 1 amma wide, and it's something that you can actually walk on, but it's not at the top of the Mizbeach. So when they say they're going to put it, he's saying you're putting it on the kevesh keneged hasoves. It means it would be down further on the mizbeach, so that on the side it would be right next to where the sovev sticks out. And that's about halfway down from the top. Okay. Hechelu ma'alin be'efer al gabei tapuach. So then they start to so what it means is they're starting to put the ash that's in different parts, like anywhere on the mizbeach, and they're going to push it into the tapuach in the middle. The tapuach haya be'emtza hamizbeach, or it was in the middle of the mizbeach. And then it talks about how big it could get, and we said, alav keshosh meyat kur, sometimes it had 300 kur, which the Gemara says, and the Bartanur says that's an exaggeration, but it means it was very, very big. Sometimes it was very big, over regalim, lo hayim medashnin oto, on the regel they wouldn't remove that dashen, because it was like a beautification of the Mizbeach when all the people have come up for the regal to see this big pile of ash in the middle of the Mizbeach. But it emphasizes Miyamav lo nitatzel kohen belotzia tedeshin. It's not because they were lazy that they didn't take it down, because Kohanim were zuizin and they would take it down when it was necessary. Then hechelu ma'alin bigizuin. So one of the mitzvot that says in the Torah is you have to bring wood logs onto the mizbeach. This is done every day. So now at this point, now they've kind of organized the mizbeach. They would bring the logs. They need to bring 2 logs. And then it talks about what kind of wood they would use, and we'll skip that. Sider hamaracha gedola mizracha. So then, one of the Kohanim would arrange the eastern maracha, right? So that's the big fire that's on the eastern side, the southeastern part of the mizbeach. The chazita mizracha. The face of it was on the east, and the way it was made is it was built sort of like a tent that you would be able to put the logs inside. So they would put the logs inside the chazit. They would put them in from the eastern front, and the logs would then go through the maracha and they would touch the tapuach in the middle. The Rebbe Chaya ben Hagizrin, and there was space between the logs. Hayu Metzitin et Alita Misham. So the Alita are the twigs and small branches that they would use to light the fire, and that they would. So when you build a fire, I'm sure you all know how to do this basically.
A kindling, we'd call it.
Yeah, you need kindling. So they're using kindling, and also you need a certain amount of oxygen. So you have to have like an opening inside where air can waft in, and then that's how they would light the new logs. Okay, mainly I want to get up to this Mishnah. So it says this one. So then they would choose from there, from the place where they kept the wood. They would bring fig wood from a fig tree, nice fig wood. The sader hama'aracha shniya l'ktoret, to arrange the second fire that's used for the ktoret. Mikeneged keren ma'aravit dromit. It was next to the southwest corner of the Mizbeach, Mashuch min hakeren klapei tzafon arba amot, but it was removed 4 amot northward. So that's what we saw in the picture, right? It was not right on the corner. Right, so again, this is the southwest corner. So from here to here would be 4 amot, and this is where they would set up the second maracha. V'omed chamesh sa'im gechalim. It would be about 5 sa'ah of coals. The Shabbat v'omed shmonat sa'im gechalim. And on Shabbat it would be about 8 sa'ah of coal, because you need extra coals to burn the livona that was on the shulchan, right? So when they would every week, I actually skipped over this when we were doing Tamid, because you do it only on Shabbat, and Tamid doesn't deal with all of the things that you do on Shabbat. But of course, one of the things you do on Shabbat, we did talk about, and of course you've learned in the Torah that every week they would bring lechem apanim, and when you bring the lechem apanim, you also have to bring 2 containers, like what would you call them, like censers of livona, of frankincense, and you put that on the shulchan when you put the new bread on. But then you have to remove the livona that was there all week, and that gets burnt like ktoret. So when they burn that, they need more coals than usual, right? Because you need a certain amount of coals for the Ktoret. On Shabbat, you need extra coals to burn the Ktoret and the Livona. That gets burned every Shabbat. So that's why on Shabbat, they have to have extra coals there. They have an extra 3 sa'ah of coals. Shesham hayu notnin shnei bezichei livona shelechem hapanim, because there they would put the 2 censers of livona of the lechem hapanim. And so from here it sounds like this. By the way, this is a question I've been going back and forth on. But right, so it sounds like that and I may be wrong about this, but it sounds like that the livona was burnt on those coals outside. In other words, it's not ktoret, but you need the extra coals to burn it. But they would take coals from that maracha inside to burn the ktoret on the mizbeach hapnimi. But this is what it says in the Mishnah: Shesham hayu notnin shnei bezichei livona shelechem hapanim. they would put the zichaylo, these sensors on the maracha hachitzona, on this maracha on the western side. Ha'ivarim ha'pedarim shelo nit'aklu miba'erev machzirin otan maracha. So now that was a bit of a sidetrack, and now we're going back to what was done every day. So the Kohanim, right, they set up the first the Maracha Gedolah, they put in new logs, and now they're taking care of the second Maracha. That's going to be for Ketoret, and on Shabbat it's also for Livonah. And now what? Now they're looking around to see what things didn't get burnt overnight. Right? So they left whatever parts of the animals were getting burnt, the limbs and the fats and so forth. So Evarim, the limbs and the fats, shelo nitaklu miba'erev, that were not consumed from the night before, machzirin otan ma'aracha. Those are replaced back onto the maracha. In other words, onto the maracha gedolah, like the Bartanura says, machzirin otan ma'aracha. V'nisrafim sham b'tzidei ha'ma'aracha hagdolah. They are burnt there on the side of the ma'aracha gedolah. They don't put them right on the ma'aracha gedolah, because they still have to put the evarim from the tamid that they're about to shecht and get ready for today. So the parts that weren't burnt overnight, they put them right next to it so that they'll continue to burn. Hitzitu shtei hamarachot ba'esh. They light both of the marachot with fire. V'yardu ba'u lahem lishkat hagazit. And then they go down and they go to the lishkat hagazit to do the paisot. And then it goes into the next chapter. So here, in this discussion of the marachot, it describes two marachot, right? There's the maracha on the eastern side and the maracha on the western side. So let's just take a look for a moment at the Bartanura back on Mishnah Dalet. It says, Sider HaMaracha Gdola Mizracha. The Bartanura here says, Lepi sheyesh od ma'aracha acheret, since there's another ma'aracha, Kari lahach ma'aracha Gdola. This one was distinguished by its name. They called it the Great Ma'aracha. Shalosh ma'arot. Now here, this is where the Bartanura adds in some information that's not explicit in the Mishnah. And he says, Shalosh ma'arachot hayu sham b'chol yom. There were three ma'arachot. Now we learned now, the Mishnah here really only talks about two. But he says really there were three ma'arachot every day. Achat ma'aracha gedola shesorfim alea tamid. Right, one is the big ma'aracha that is used for burning the korban tamid. Vashenit ma'aracha pchuta mimena, v'hi kruya ma'aracha shel ketoret. The second one, which is smaller than the first one, that's the ma'aracha of ketoret. Why? Shenotlim mimena gechalim b'machta l'ketoret shemakdirim b'boker uvein ha'arbaim. Because that's where they take the coals that to put into a censer for the ketoret that's going to be burned in the morning and in the evening. Bashlishit, which was not mentioned here in the Mishnah, eina mishameshet klum, elo l'kiyum ha'esh. It's not used for anything per se. I'm adding in the per se, except l'kiyum ha'esh. It's to keep a permanent fire going. And this is learned out from the pasuk va'esh al mizbeach tukad bo zu maracha shlishit shel kiyum ha'esh. When the Torah says that Eish al Mizbeach tukad bo, that's referring to a third maracha. And we'll look at the psukim in a moment and we'll see why that would be, how that would be read. So let's take a look for a moment at the... So here, just to summarize. So the Bartanura now has introduced the idea that in addition to the two marachot that are explicit here in the Mishnah, there is a third ma'aracha, and he doesn't explain that much about it, except that it's there just to fulfill the mitzvah of having a fire continually burning on the mizbeach. So let's look again here in Vayikra Perek Vav, and let's just keep count of how many fires there are here. So in the Torah it says, "Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe Lemor, Tzavet Aaron ve'et banav Lemor, Zot Torat ha'olah, Ki ha'olah al mokdah, al hamizbeach, kol halayla ad haboker ve'esh hamizbeach tukad bo." So in this one pasuk, it says, this is right. So this is the law regarding an olah. This is the olah al mokdah that's on a fire, that's on the mizbeach all night until the morning. Ve'esh hamizbeach tukad bo. So again, it uses from the root, the same root of yakad. It says tukad bo. The fire of the mizbeach will be ignited from this, will be burnt from this. And then it talks about Trumat HaDeshen, right? So the Kohen has to put on Michnesei Ban, Midoban, Michnesei Ban, Yibash Obserov, bring it to Deshen, Shetach HaEsh, Et HaOlah HaMizbeach, V'samo Eitz HaMizbeach, right? So he takes Deshen from the Mizbeach, and he goes down the ramp, and he puts it, as we learned in the Mishnah, he puts it, there's a place that's on the eastern side of the Mizbeach where he'll put that Deshen. Then he has to change his clothes. He has to remove that deshen outside of the Mishkan, and he places it in a makom tohar. But now we come back to the fire. It says, "Vayesh al mizbeach tukad bo lo tichbeh." Again, it tells us that the fire that's on the mizbeach has to burn on it and not be put out. Uviyar leha kohen etzim baboker baboker. So, this is where the Torah commands that you have to put on logs every morning onto the Mizbeach. So, the minimum of eitzim is 2, right? It's a plural, so it means 2. So that's why they put 2 gizrei eitzim onto the Mizbeach. And then they're going to arrange on it the olah, and they're going to burn on it the fats of the shlamim. And then it finishes off by saying once again, Eish tamid tukad al mizbeach lo tichbeh. So it keeps coming. The psukim keep emphasizing this idea that you have to be burning fire on the mizbeach constantly. So why so much repetition? So let's look now here in Yoma. So in our Mishnah in Masechet Yoma, Mishnah Vav, B'chol Yom hayu sham arba ma'arachot. Right. So right away we see this Mishnah is not the same as what was described in Tamid. It's not even the same as what the Bartanura added in, because the Bartanura said there are 3 ma'arachot every day. Here it says there are 4 ma'arachot every day. B'hayom chamesh, divrei Rabbi Meir. Today there's 5. What's today? What's the hayom?
Yom Kippurim.
Yom Kippur. So Rabbi Meir holds that Stama de Milta, right, that just normally every day you have 4 fires burning, and today you have a 5th. Rabbi Yossi Omer b'chol yom shalosh. He disagrees. He says no, every day you have 3, which is right. That's like the shita that the Bartanura alluded to. B'hayom arba, and today you have a 4th. Rabbi Yehuda Omer b'chol yom shtayim. B'hayom shalosh. So we see this was a controversy. Now we understand like, just in terms of comparing the Mishnayot, you could argue that the Mishnah in Tamid is going like Rabbi Yehuda, because the Mishnah in Tamid only talks about two ma'arachot. But how do each of them come to their conclusions? So this is the sugya here in the Gemara, and we'll just see how the Bartanura sums it up. He says, "V'chol yom ayu sham b'mizbeach hachitzon." Every day there was there on the outer mizbeach arba ma'arachot shel etzim shemevarim aleihem ha'esh. Every day there were 4 fires of wood that they were burnt. They would burn fire on them. Achat maracha gedola shemakrivin alea atamid. Right. So that's the one in the south. I'm sorry. That's the one in the southeast. V'achad ma'aracha shniya shemimena notlim eish lemizbeach haktoret. So that's the second one that was talked about in Masechet Tamid. That's on the western side. It's a little removed from the southwest corner, and that's where they take the coals to burn the ketoret. V'achat ma'aracha shel kiyum ha'esh. Shelo tasur misham eish liolam. There's a third one just to keep a fire going, so that the fire will not be removed from there forever, or it will not ever be removed from there. There'll always be fire burning. So there's a third fire that's put there just to make sure that eish tamid tukal hal mizbeach, like the Bartanura said over in Tamid. V'achat ma'aracha shel evarim u'fedarim shel tamid shel bein ha'arbaim shelo nitaklu mi ba'erev v'lo nisrefu kol halayla. There's a fourth one. The fourth one is for the limbs and the fats of the tamid from yesterday evening that were not completely consumed. Sorfim otam b'maracha zu. Those are burnt on this 4th ma'aracha. So what did the Bartanura say? So the Bartanura back in Tamid, he says there's 3. Where did you burn the evarim u'pedarim that were not consumed the night before? Because there wasn't a 4th ma'aracha. Where did the Bartanura say that those are burnt?
Basically, just on the southeast maracha, but sort of to one side of it.
Right. So presumably that's going to be. I'm assuming that means that they're on the north side of that maracha. That would be the side of that maracha. And here, according to Rabbi Meir, you have a completely separate 4th maracha for that purpose. Umosifin b'yom kippurim od ma'aracha achat. So on Yom Kippur there's a 5th one. Litol mimena gechalim l'ktoret lifnai v'lifnim. There's a separate one that you need to use for the ketoret that will go all the way inside the Kodesh HaKodashim. Because the Kohen Gadol, aside from burning ketoret inside the Kodesh HaKodashim, he also still has to burn the ketoret on the Mizbeach HaZahav, on the Mizbeach HaPnimi. So the regular coals that he'll get from there, he's going to still take from that maracha to burn the regular ketoret. But he'll need more coals to go into the Kodesh HaKodashim to burn the ketoret that's in the Kodesh HaKodashim. Right? It's the only time that you burn ketoret in the Kodesh HaKodashim. So according to Rabbi Meir, you need a 5th maracha. So actually, what do we see in the Mishnah? We have a 3-way machloket. Everyone agrees that there's an extra maracha on Yom Kippur. So presumably that's what they all agree upon. They all agree that you can't take the coals from the regular 2nd maracha that's used for the regular ketoret. You need special coals for the ketoret that goes inside the Kodesh HaKodashim. Rabbi Yossi Omer b'chol yom shalosh. And now we'll see his drasha. The Shosha Kraich Tive. there are 3 psukim that are written. Al mokda, al hamizbeach, kol halayla ad haboker, zu maracha gdola. Ve'esh hamizbeach tukan bo, zu maracha shniya shel ketoret. והאש על המזבח תוקד בו לא תכבה זו מערכה שלישית של קיום האש. So that's the way Rabbi Yossi understands. He takes the first 2 he gets from the beginning of the parsha. It's the second pasuk, which I have down here. Tzavet Aaron v'panav lemor v'zot Torat Elohi al mokda al hamizbeach kol halayla boker v'yesh hamizbeach tukad bo. He understands that refers to 2 separate mokdot, 2 separate marachot. And then the third one is from the end of the parsha, v'yesh hamizbeach tukad bo lo tichbe. That's where he gets the third one. So the third, and that one we understand even in context. The Torah is telling you that you have to have fire that's burning on the Mizbech that doesn't go out. Which I think one of the reasons is there's this idea. Hold on a second. Go back to the psukim for a second. See, the very end, the pasuk after it says, Eish tamid tukad al mizbeach lo tichbeh. So we've discussed this before. What does tamid mean? Right? We say eternal or always. But we know that it doesn't necessarily mean continuously. It doesn't, right? Because we have the korban tamid. Korban tamid means you bring it twice every day. But it doesn't mean that you have to have a korban burning 24 hours a day. So tamid can mean different things in different contexts. But here it seems that the Torah is going out of its way to tell us that this tamid means constantly, because it says lo tichbeh. If it didn't say lo tichbeh, I might just think, if I light it once a day, that's tamid. I'm doing it constantly. It has a constancy to it. So Rabbi Yossi understands that that's what that pasuk is there for. And now, of course, the question to Rabbi Yossi is, so what about the Evarim u'Pedarim that weren't consumed the night before? Right, Umaracha Revi'it le'Evarim u'Pedarim shelo nitaklu let Leile Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi doesn't hold that there is a 4th Maracha, Dispirale, because he holds Shevarim u'Pedarim shelo nitaklu B'tzidei ma'aracha gdola heim nisrafim. They're burnt at the side of the large ma'aracha, and so we understand that the Bartanura in Tamid was relaying Rabbi Yossi's opinion. This is Rabbi Yossi's opinion. There isn't a 4th ma'aracha. You don't need a 4th ma'aracha. You can just burn those Evarim Ptarim right next to the ma'aracha gdola. Now we have Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda omer b'chol yom shtayim. Deleit le maracha shlishit shel kiyum ha'esh. Rabbi Yehuda holds that there isn't a 3rd separate maracha just to have a constant fire. Umikra shlishi shel v'ha'esh al mizbech tukad bo lo tichbeh. So what does he do with that 3rd pasuk that says Eish al mizbech tukad bo lo tichbeh, that Rabbi Yossi learned out from that you need a 3rd maracha? Darish le Rabbi Yehuda shehamav'ir ksamim dakim kedei lahatzit ha'esh al hamaracha gdola lo yatzit al haritzpa v'ya'alein keshehem dolkim lamizbeach ela yadlikem barosh hamizbeach. he learns what it's telling you is that what's the wording of the pasuk is Esh al ha'esh al hamizbeach tukadbo. He's putting an emphasis on a different part of the pasuk. The fire has to be burnt. It has to be ignited on the mizbeach. That so he understands that it's not to tell you need another maracha. It means to tell you that when you light the kindling, you take the kindling, hamavir ksamin dakim kedei when you're lighting the kindling in order to fire up the big maracha, that you don't light those on the ground floor, like on the ground of the floor of the mishkan or the mikdash, and then bring them up when they're already lit. It means you have to light them at the top of the mizbeach. V'alacha Rabbi Yossi, and we hold like Rabbi Yossi, and since halacha is like Rabbi Yossi, yesh lomar that's what informs the Bartanura when he made his explanation in Masechet Tamid. Right, so it's to tell you that that's what it is. So it's an interesting thing, this idea of how many ma'arachot there are. But the takeaway, one of the main takeaways for our purposes is we want to understand that everybody holds that you need an extra ma'aracha on Yom Kippur. Because here we are in Yoma, we have to understand that there's an extra ma'aracha, and that's going to be to take coals for the Ketoret Lifnai V'Lifnim, for the Kodesh HaKodeshim. So, yes. So that brings us back to the end of this chapter. Also, there's something I wanted to say, and I'm pretty sure I made a mistake when I explained this earlier. I should have led with this. When we came here now to chapter 4, let's do a quick review of what we said in chapter 4. So the beginning of chapter 4 is when he takes the Goralot and he designates the two Seirim. And then once they're designated, he takes a crimson strip and puts it, on the one that's Lazazel, he puts it on its head, and the one that's Lachatat, he puts it around its neck so that they won't get mixed up. Then it says Balo Eitzel Parosh Shniya, and I think I explained this, mistranslated this. I think I might have said that he came to his second par. It doesn't mean he came to his second par, but of course it would have been Parosh Sheni, not Shniya anyway. What it means is Balo Eitzel Parosh Shniya. He comes to his par a second time. There is only one par. And he comes to it a second time to do the second vidui. And I apologize for this because something I think I got confused about myself. But just to clarify this a little bit more, I think... second. A long time ago when we were starting this whole Masechet, we learned through Parshat Achremot in the beginning, and then afterwards I made up this sheet. This was a way of keeping track of all the different things, all the different avodot that are particular to Yom Kippur, and we don't have to read through the whole thing, but what I marked off was this, right? Beginning in here in Pasuk Gimel, it says, "Bezot yavo Aaron el Kodesh befar ben bakar lechatat va'ayil leolah." So the Kohen has to bring a par and an ayil, right? So par for the chatat, ayil leolah. Me'et adat b'nei Yisrael yikach shnei sirei zim lechatat va'ayil echad leolah. So right? So those are the two Seirim, and they also bring an Ayil. So there's, on the one hand, we have the par of the Kohen Gadol, and we'll also have the Sir L'chatat of Bnei Yisrael. And so, what does it say? Hikriv Aaron et parachatat asher lo v'chiper bado uvad beito. And what I marked here is mitvadeh al paro. This is where he says vidui on his par. So that's what we saw in Perek Shlishi. He says that's the first vidui. Then v'lakach et shnei asirim ve'amid otam lifnei Hashem petach ol moed. ונטע אהרון על שני הסירים גורלות, גורל אחד השם, גורל אחד לעזאזל. So this is the Miyun Hasirim. That's the beginning of the third chapter. That's Tarath Bekalpi. Then V'ikriv Aaron et asir she'alav ha'goral Hashem v'yasau chatat. And what I put here is Mi'a'ed Seir l'chatat. Doesn't mean that he doesn't shecht it right then, but he's designated one now as being a chatat. And that's what he did with the goralot and then tying on the shonot shel zorit. Hasir she'alav ha'goral azazel yamod chai lifnei Hashem b'chaper alav v'shalach oto azazel midbara. And we saw that in the Mishnah, Amid Seir la'azazel. They just stand the Seir la'azazel connected the gate that he's going to be taken out of. So those Seirim now are in waiting. Hikriv Aaron et parachatat asher lo v'chiper ba'ado uvad beito v'shachat et parachatat asher lo. Now here I just marked Chitat Paro, but the other thing is Hikriv Aaron et parachatat asher lo v'chiper ba'ado uvad beito. So this repetition of v'chiper ba'ado uvad beito, right? It already said that back in Pasuk Vav, v'chiper ba'ado uvad beito. So the understanding is that he goes back to his par a second time, and then he's mitvadeh a second time. So if you remember, what's the difference between the first vidui and the second vidui?
I believe that the first one is just for him and his family, and the second one is for the Kohanim in general. Or am I getting this?
Yes, no. That's correct. So in other words, first, so wait, let me see if I can bring this up. Sec. Bum, 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 bum. So here we are. This is in the end of the third chapter. Balo etzel paro hayomed ben olam mizbeach, etc. Kohen omed b'mizrach ufanav amrav samech sheyadav b'alev umitvadeh kachaya omer. Ana Hashem aviti pashati chatati ufanecha ani uveiti. And when we look at the vidui in the fourth chapter, what does it say? Ana Hashem aviti pashati chatati ufanecha ani uveiti uvnei Aharonam kadoshecha. Right? We mentioned this at the time, but I think I may have misled myself and misled you. That's what happens when I don't pay attention. It's the same par. And this is the way Chazal understood those psukim, because the psukim seem to repeat themselves. It says twice, v'chiper ba'ado uvad beito. So what they understand is that the first time is kapara, like Michael said, for himself and his family. The second time is kapara for all of the Kohanim. And then the third vidui, which will be on the Seir L'chatat, the Seir Chatat, that will be the vidui for all of Am Yisrael. So I wanted to clarify that, and I apologize for misleading everybody. Just a sec. And the Gemara, if I can see if I can find this quickly. I'm not sufficiently expert to remember exactly, but I think. So I can't remember now which daf it's on. But the Gemara makes this point that what's the logic? What's the logic of doing the vidui first for himself and then doing a second vidui for all of the Kohanim and then doing the third vidui for Bnei Yisrael? What's the logic? Why not just do one vidui for everybody?
I mean, I think he would. I think the. I mean, the Kohen Gadol is sort of an agent for the Kohanim in general, and therefore, if he's not in good standing, then the dewey for the Kohanim in general won't go through, and the Kohanim in general are some shulchim for the for Am Yisrael in general, and therefore they have to be in the clear before the general.
Very good, right? It's exactly right. So what we know is that, especially today on Yom Kippur, the avodah is dependent on the Kohen Gadol himself. So essentially, the first major act that he has to do from the avodah of Yom HaKippurim is to say vidui for himself, so that he's ra'ui to do the avodah for the whole day. And then, like Michael said, so that'll be the first order of business. But the second order of business is also to do a vidui for all of the Kohanim, because the avodah that they're doing, right, and they're all going to, even though they're not doing the avodot per se, but we see they are helping. They have to still be there to do avodot in the Beit Hamikdash. And of course, they have to be there all year round to do the avodot for Beit Hamikdash. And this is mishana l'shana. So then, in order to make them worthy, the Kohen Gadol is going to say vidui on their behalf. And then, like Michael said, they're representing everybody. So then you have to have a vidui, and that is ultimately the point, that we want a kapara for all of Am Yisrael. So now that the Kohen Gadol is Ra'ui, and then through him the Kohanim are now Ra'uyim, now they're in a position to say vidui to bring kapara for all of Bnei Yisrael. So that's the basic logic. Okay, I think we'll move on to the next chapter, and I did not get a chance to make my sheets. I don't know how much you guys care about my sheets. I like them. I find them much easier to use once I do them, but for our purposes, we're just going to we'll just use the Ala Torah website, and we'll start. What we'll do is we'll start the next chapter, and then we'll pick up next time. I have to stop a little bit early tonight. Okay. So now we're in the 5th chapter. It says, "Hotziu lo et hakaf v'et hamachta, v'chafna v'natan latoch hakaf. Hagadol lefi gadlo, v'katan lefi katno, v'kach hayta midata." So they took out for him the kaf and the machta. So the kaf is going to be what? What is the kaf for?
To take the calls.
No, so that's what the machta is for. Okay, but so then what's the kaf for?
The Keturah,
For the Torah. Hang on a
process of
second.
elimination.
And that's a good way of learning, right? That's how we keep things straight. Hold on a second. Let me share with you what we learned back in Masechet Tamid in the 5th chapter, after they did the pious for Chadashim L'Ktoret. Somebody never done Ktoret before, in the 5th chapter, the fourth Mishnah. Mish zacha b'Ktoret hayanotel et hakaf. V'hakaf domeh letarkav gadol shel zahav. It was like a big sort of spoon, or can't think of, like a scoop maybe, of gold. Machzik shloshet kabin. V'habazach haya betocho. So the bazach was inside of it. The bazach, like the Bartanura says, is a smaller kaf. It's like a kaf betoch a kaf. Melo v'gadush ktoret. So every day they had this kaf that would hold the ktoret, and they put it inside another larger kaf. Remember, right? Because they want to make sure that the ktoret doesn't blow all over, so they protect it inside this larger kaf. The chisui hayalo, and the larger kaf had a top. Kumin mitutelet hayalav milamalan, and there was a mitutelet on it. The different understandings of what the mitutelet was, lo mishneh, but the idea was that that's what they did every day. And then misha zacha b'machta, natal machta takesef, he would take the censer, whatever, the coal shovel. He'd go up to the top of the mizbeach, and he would move around the coals, and then he would take, right, the silver machta. That's what he would use to remove the coals from the mizbeach, and then he would go down and pour them into the golden one. And we learned already in the 4th chapter in Yoma that on Yom Kippur they did it differently. What was different on Yom Kippur about the machta?
Different material, if I recall.
There were two things that were different.
So the material, and I believe that only one is used on Yom Kippur.
Yes, that's correct.
I'm off the.
You, you pulled it off. Yafeh. Um,
Shel,
yes.
you should do a movie out of it, or at least a cartoon. And it would be easier to understand what's going on.
You know what? You're right.
Today, everybody does this.
You're right. Halavai that I should work with somebody who does animation, because actually, I'm all for that. The visualization is really good.
I mean, as I said to you before, I think that there really needs to be sort of rich and scary version of this, and the busy town
Oh
shots.
yeah,
I
yes.
mean, that would
And I think
do
I
that as
told you when we were in yeshiva, like in the 70s, is before they had a lot of these illustrated books about Melachot Shabbat. One of the Rabbanim brought in Paul Schaefer. I don't know if you're familiar with this, because I don't know if they were translated into Hebrew or not. there was this author, children's author in the States, Richard Scarry, and he made these wonderful books that showed like busy people doing things, but they were very practical. Like it showed you all kinds of
how
things
how
that
how
people would do.
how things work in a city.
So there's one of the books is a big book, and it shows you people doing all kinds of different crafts. And if you look at that book carefully, it covers most of the malachot of Shabbat. And so one of my teachers brought it in to explain different malachot. Like I think there's a loom there. You understand ariga. There's like and there's fire. Like there's all these things. And of course, eventually somebody did make that book. There is a children's book in Hebrew and English for all the malachot of Shabbat that's done in a very similar style. Somebody picked up on it. It was an American rabbi who picked up on it, and he made a very
It's,
nice book.
it's actually a really good book.
You've seen that book.
It's
I
very,
have.
very, very useful. Very useful. And it's a very good book.
So
Explains both what the activities are and explains the concepts behind them. Explains
mhm.
very, very clear terms what the malachot are and how the different laws are derived. It's very
Yes, and right, and they distinguish between the things that are dioraita and the rabbanan, but it's exactly what Paul is talking about. It's like an animated version of all the malachot, and that's here also. So here, we learned this before. B'chol yom haya choteh b'shel kasif u'mareh b'toch shel zahav. That's what we just saw in Masechet Tamid. Every day he would scoop the coals with a silver scooper, and he would pour that into a machteh that's made of gold. Hayom choteh b'shel zahav uva haya machnis. V'chol yom choteh b'shel arbaat kabin u'mareh b'toch shel shloshet kabin. Right, he took more than what he needed so that he would completely fill the second one. Vayom choteh b'shel shloshet kabin uva haya machnis. Right, and that was both to reduce the amount of work for the Kohen Gadol, and also it was gold so that it would be more mehudar, right? It would be something more glorious to do everything with gold. So very good. So here, hotziu lo et hakaf et hamachta. So now the first thing that he has to do, based on based on what the Torah said. Hold on a second. Let's go back. I'm sort of skipping around different documents here. So let's see. We'll continue on in the psukim. V'lakach melo hamachta gacha le'esh me'al mizbeach milifnei Hashem. So the Kohen Gadol is going to take a full machta. Let's make this a little bigger. He takes a full machta of coals from the mizbeach that milifnei Hashem. Now, mizbeach milifnei Hashem is the outside mizbeach. Umelo chafnav ktoret samim daka. He has to take his hands full of the Ktoret that's Daka, and we already mentioned that on Yom Kippur they took the Ktoret, which was already fine, and they would bring it back to pound it again to make it Daka min hadaka. Vehevi mi beit la parochet, and then he would bring that inside the parochet, right into the Kodesh HaKodeshim. So this is what the Mishnah is describing now here at the beginning of the fifth parak. Hotziu lo et hakaf et hamachta b'chafan melo chafnav v'natan letoch hakaf. Right, so he digs in his handfuls. Right, he scoops his handfuls. Okay, chafan is both the verb and the noun. He scoops his handfuls and places it into the kaf, which they just translate as spoon, but okay. Hagadol lefi gadlo, the large one according to his largeness, and the small one according to his smallness. And that was its measure. So what does it mean, Hagadol lefi gadlo, the large one according to his his largeness and the small one according to his smallness. And that was its measure. What does it mean? What's it referring to?
Basically basically a heaping spoonful for each one, and according to the size of the spoon.
No, but he's not measuring it with a spoon. How is he measuring it?
Oh, with his hand, excuse me. And so
So
and so it depend on the basically a handful depending on the size of his hand.
right. So here it's very explicit. So when we talk about shiurim, like a kazayit or a kabetza or mashaloya, the Mishnah in Negaim talks about that. Like what egg are we talking about? What zayit are we talking about? There's a Mishnah that discusses all that. Those were considered to be standard shiurim for everybody. But here, this is actually particular to the Kohen Gadol. That Kohen Gadol, if he had big hands, then he had big handfuls. But let's say he was a small guy and a small hand, that doesn't matter. The standard is based on the Kohen Gadol himself, which I think is
I guess
food
we
for
see the
thought.
same. I guess we see
Go
the
ahead.
same thing for the mincha offering. No, so that the kamatz is depends on the size of the hand.
Right. Kometz is also based on the size of the hand of the Kohen, whoever is doing the kmitzah. Very good. It gives you some food for thought about. I'm not going to digress on this, but it's a very interesting thing to think about shiurim, what they mean, why are some of them standard for everybody across the board, and why are some particular to a particular person in a particular place. But we'll leave that for now. Natala tamachta bimino v'takaf bismolo. So he takes the machta that has the coals in his right hand, and he'll take the kaf that has the ktoret in his left hand. Haya mehalech bahechal ad shemagia levein shtei haparochot hamavdilot bein hakodesh uvein kodesh hakodeshim uveinehen amma. So he goes inside, and according to the way the Mishnah is describing, it's describing two parochot, right? So there's a parochet that you see when you walk into the Heichal, into the Kodesh, and then you head toward the south side, and there's a little opening there, and then you walk through this passage, which is 1 amma wide, and you come out on the north side, and there's a little passage, and that's how you enter the Kodesh HaKodeshim. So there are two parochot, and we're going to discuss. We will go into this more next time, but for right now, we're just taking the way this is being described here, because you remember, of course, in
Is this only here? Because it's the first time I hear something like this. I always heard about one parochet between.
So let's talk about that just for a second. So where did you hear about the one parochet? Where does it talk about one parochet?
It's about in relation to the Bab Midbar.
Right, in the Mishkan, right? The Mishkan, it tells you there's a parochet. It doesn't talk about two parochot, right? So where's the second? What's the deal with the second parochet? Where is this coming from? So right now, let's just go with this, and we're going to examine this. We're going to look at it from the Mishkan, from Mikdash Shlomo, and Mikdash Sheni. So this is describing Beit HaMikdash Sheni, right? So let's just see how but of course everything has to have a basis in halacha in order for it to be kosher. But here it's describing the reality of what was there in Beit Sheni. So he would go into the Heichal until he came to in between the two parochot, the two curtains. Hamavdilot ben Kodesh uben Kodesh HaKodeshim. Ubeinehen amma. In between these two curtains was 1 amma. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Lo hayta sham ela parochet achad bilvad. He says, no. Actually, even in Bayit Sheni, there was only one parochet. Shneimar v'hivtila haparochet lechem ben hakodesh u'ben kodesh hakodeshim. He takes it straight from the Mishkan. Same thing as in the Mishkan. There was a parochet that distinguished between the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKodeshim. And Achitzon, but now we're going back. Achitzona, we're going back to the Tanakama. Achitzona haita frufa min hadarom, vapninit min hatzafon. So the outer parochet that was like curled back on the south side, that in other words, so that he could walk in and go to the south side, and it was like pulled back a little bit so he could enter. And then he walked this width of an amma between the two parochot, and at the north side it was also prufa, it was also curled back, so he could enter from there into the Kodesh HaKodeshim. I can give you a kind of a crude.
It's like a lock.
Yeah. You can get an idea of it from here. This is very crude. 1 second, I'll share my screen. This is based on the Rambam's drawing of the Beit HaMikdash. But you can see, why did I do that? Hold on a second, I'm sorry. It jumped. Okay, here's the Kodesh HaKodeshim. I have to learn how to control this better. Hold on. Here's the Kodesh HaKodeshim. Okay, so here again, this is an extremely basic drawing, right? Here's the ulam. We know that there's stairs that go up to the right. There's stairs that go up to the ulam. This is the shar of the ulam. Here's the ulam. Here's the shar hagadol, which actually had to be opened in the morning. The shar of the ulam wasn't a door, right? There was a shar that wasn't a door. Here there's a door, and then the Kohen Gadol would go into the Heichal, and he would come here to the south side of the outer parochet. Comes here to the south side of the outer parochet. It keeps highlighting the menorah, but you can see it. It's right above the menorah. And then he would walk in this area here, and he would come out over here. I'm sorry, this is not the demonstration I was hoping for, but you can see this is what it is. This is how he comes in. At least I hope you can see. But I agree with Paul. This would be great if I just animated it.
What is this
So
door near the Shulchan? Why is there an opening there? To the side.
Yes, there was an opening there. I'd have to go through it with you a little bit in Midot, but in the morning when they came to open up, there is, according to one opinion, that actually there's like a Mesilah here that he would go, the Kohen would go in and he would enter through here, and then come from the inside to open up the Shar Hagadol. But yes, yeah. But that is there on purpose. There is this idea that there is an opening there. And this drawing that was here, I think I mentioned this. I think I even showed you. This is based on the manuscript drawing of the Rambam himself, which was a bit more crude, but surprisingly, maybe shouldn't say surprising, was the Rambam. He was a reasonably good draftsman for his age, and what they did here is they took his skizza, they took his sketch, and they just sort of cleaned it up a little bit to make it a little, to make it look like it is now. But if you look in the Rambam's drawing, this is basically his drawing. Let's go back to the Mishnah. Okay, so החיצונאית הפרופה מן הדרום, הפנימית מן הצפון, מהלך ביניהם. The Kohen Gadol would walk between them, עד שמגיע לצפון, until he got to the north. הגיע לצפון, הופך פניו לדרום. When he got up to the northern side, he would turn his head to face south. In other words, he would enter, and then he would face south. So basically, he comes in the Heichal, he goes through the south side of, the south opening of the Parochet. So when he does that, he has to turn right. His face will be facing north. He goes up to the north, right, to the northern wall, and then he immediately is going to turn facing the west, and he'll walk through, and then he faces south. He's facing to his left from the way he walked into the Kodesh HaKodashim. הגיע לצפון, הופך פניו בדרום, מהלך לשמאלו עם הפרוכת עד שהוא מגיע לארון. So he goes along his left with the parochet. In other words, he's right next to the parochet until he comes to the aron. הגיע לארון, נותן את המחתה בין שני הבדים. Then he would take the coal censer and he would put it between the two badim, the two
Holes.
rods. Yeah, poles. Tzavar et ketoret al gabei gechalim. He would heap the ketoret on top of the coals. V'nitmalei kol habayit kulo ashan. And the whole house, the whole room there would be filled with smoke. Yatsa ubalo b'derech beit knisato. He would go out the way he came in. Umitpalel tefillah ktsara b'bayit hachitzon. And he would say a short prayer in the outer room, in the heichal. V'lo haya ma'arich b'tfilato shelo lahav'it et Yisrael. He would not daven too long. He wouldn't go at length with his tefillah, so he wouldn't scare Yisrael. What would they be scared of?
That he wasn't coming out.
That he wasn't coming out. Why might he not come out?
If for whatever reason he's not acceptable, the penalty is, or if somebody not acceptable goes in, the penalty is death.
Yeah. And remember, this is how Nadav and Abihu is by bringing they bring an Esh Zara. So, and we know this is all connected to the Avodah. Yom Kippur is very much connected to the death of Nadav and Abihu. That's how the parsha starts off. So there is this idea that if you do not do the Avodah correctly, you could die at Hashem's hands right inside. So people are anxious to see that the Kohen Gadol, who's doing this extremely important avodah, bringing the Ketoret into the Kodesh HaKodashim, that he comes out alive, because everybody's kapara is dependent on his avodah.
Another side to this, of course, is that we learn from the first time that Moshe goes up the mountain that Bnei Yisrael are not always very good at waiting.
I'm laughing, but that's true. It's very good. It's a bit that I didn't think of that, but yeah, you shouldn't keep them waiting. Yeah, fair. So we're gonna stop here, and next week this is what we'll pick up. We'll do this Mishnah with the Bartenu, and we'll look at some other related sources. But as some people might say, now things are getting interesting. In other words, now we're getting into the sort of the nuts and bolts of these avodot that are very particular to Yom Kippur. And now this is one of them. One of them is to bring the Ketoret inside of the Kodesh HaKodeshim, in addition to the Ketoret that's going to be burnt on the Mizbeach HaZahav. And we'll talk a little bit about that. Like, what's the purpose of this Ketoret? What's happening with this Ketoret? Why is it so important? And this is the setup for other Avodot. He still has to go back in to sprinkle blood in the Kodesh HaKodeshim. But this is the beginning. This is to make things ready, as it were. The first thing he has to do is to burn Ketoret and fill that room with smoke. And we know also from other references that we've seen, this idea of Ashan in the holy place is very significant. This is what happened at Mamad Har Sinai, right? Hashem reveals himself in a cloud of smoke, and this is being.
Is it Ashan or Arafel? Because in other places
Ashan is one of the.
They talk about Arafel, but you don't really see what's going on.
Yes. So let's talk about that next time. But Ashan is one of the things that is at Har Sinai. There is Ashan and Arafel, if I remember correctly. But we understand this is one of this act of bringing in the Ketoret is something that it seems to me that this is part of a recreation of the revelation at Sinai. It's a very similar thing, right? So only Moshe goes up to Har Sinai, and okay, we'll talk about it more next time, but we'll think about that. It's setting a stage for that kind of recreation. So he's not going to get the Torah again, but it is going to be the basis now for getting kapara for all of Am Yisrael. So we'll try to talk about the references and maybe how they relate, but mainly we're going to try to get through the Mishnah with the Bartanura and just keep in mind the order of what we're doing on, what the Kohen Gadol is doing on Yom Kippur. So, Yefeh, thank you everybody.
Thank you.
And
Thank you. Good
God
night.
willing, I will see you next week.
Good night.
Rat.
Bye-bye.